When leaders announce export controls, the headline rarely tells the whole story. The assumption is that cutting off a rival's supply line creates an immediate victory. But what if removing your enemy from the global market is actually funding their new factory? Data from 2023 through 2026 reveals that Washington's strategy to choke China's AI future functioned as an involuntary research and development accelerator for Beijing. By cutting access to Western intellectual property, the U.S. removed its own leverage over innovation trajectories. The result is not a stalled competitor, but a fully sovereign adversary capable of advancing without American chips or software, a scenario significantly more dangerous than the status quo ante 22. To understand this shift, we must map the specific points where pressure was applied and how they triggered domestic substitution rather than collapse. The U.S. strategy pivoted in late October 2022 from gradual containment to active degradation of Chinese semiconductor capabilities. This approach targets four critical choke points that had previously allowed for rapid integration into global supply chains: chip designs, electronic design automation software, manufacturing equipment, and specific high-end components. Before this shift, the path was clear. Beijing could purchase Western technology or license it through joint ventures. The sanctions removed this easy path to development by making those transactions illegal or impossible. The immediate reaction from Washington was that these restrictions would freeze Chinese progress at a lower performance threshold forever. However, restricting fundamental research collaboration creates a backlash rather than isolation. Research indicates that when targeted nations are banned from joint publications and conference participation with Western institutions, they do not retreat into silence. Instead, the collapse of international scientific cooperation forces them to accelerate domestic innovation simply to survive. Over 15 authors contributed to analysis on this phenomenon, confirming that sanctions in science force a rapid pivot toward total self-reliance. The result is an independent ecosystem built specifically to bypass Western intellectual property rights, effectively neutralizing the leverage of future export controls before they can even be fully deployed. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This dynamic becomes even more complex when we look at how intelligence transfers across physical barriers. Even if Washington successfully blocks high-end hardware from entering China, the strategic value of that technology does not vanish. It migrates through legal and digital channels. This is where the concept of distillation creates a trap for policymakers. Distillation allows competitors to train smaller domestic models using outputs generated by powerful US AI teachers via application programming interfaces or cloud access. As noted in testimony regarding recent cases involving major model developers, export restrictions alone are futile without active defense measures against this form of IP theft and model replication. The intelligence leaks through the API while the hardware remains blocked, meaning China gains the capability to innovate rapidly without needing the physical chips that triggered the sanctions in the first place. The futility of static bans becomes apparent when we consider how benchmarks move over time. Current U.S. policy aims to lock Chinese firms out by holding performance thresholds constant while global technology advances. This approach assumes a linear progression where China must always chase an American lead. However, this fails against modern tactics that allow for rapid iteration and adaptation. When the target is forced into isolation, it stops trying to catch up on the Western track and instead builds its own road entirely from scratch. The policy represents a reversal of 25 years of U.S. trade and technology strategy toward China, aiming not just for maintenance of superiority but for active degradation. Yet this aggressive, forced decoupling has triggered an unexpected strategic shift within Beijing, accelerating domestic innovation by eliminating reliance on Western intellectual property at every level of the stack. The long-term cost is best understood as the creation of a sovereign adversary. The narrative that sanctions are a victory lap assumes that dependency equals vulnerability and that removing supply creates weakness. In reality, the U.S. has successfully engineered its own most dangerous competitor, an entity with no structural need for American technology who can now innovate without Western constraints. This shift means that future leverage points evaporate because Beijing is no longer playing by rules they cannot enforce on themselves. The strategic outcome is not a stalled rival but a fully sovereign technological superpower capable of advancing independently, rendering the original blockade obsolete once the domestic ecosystem reaches critical mass. The psychological dimension of this competition further complicates the picture for U.S. strategists. In behavioral studies regarding trust in automated systems, over 40% of participants treated AI as a predictive authority regarding their own behavior, leading to suboptimal decisions when that authority was challenged or removed. This suggests that reliance on external tools creates a vulnerability not just in hardware, but in decision-making frameworks. When the U.S. removes those tools from China's reach, it forces Beijing to develop its own internal logic and operational standards. The odds of foregoing guaranteed rewards increased by a factor of 3.39 when participants trusted AI systems over their own judgment, highlighting how deep this dependency runs. By severing that trust link, Washington has compelled an adversary to rely entirely on indigenous decision-making structures that are immune to American influence. The data from the past few years confirms that this is not a temporary delay but a permanent structural realignment. While headlines frame sanctions as a blockade preventing progress, the reality is a forced pivot in strategy where the target builds its own supply chain and intellectual property base. The U.S. has effectively removed China's access to Western tech, inadvertently removing its own leverage over Beijing's innovation trajectory. Instead of slowing Chinese AI development, these measures have stripped away the dependency that made China vulnerable to pressure. We are now witnessing the emergence of a competitor that does not need American chips or software to advance, creating a strategic paradox where Washington's most aggressive move has created its worst-case scenario, an independent power capable of matching U.S. capabilities without ever needing permission from Washington again. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.